Your Classical Storytime is supported by All Energy Solar, dedicated to making a brighter future for your children. Offering solar installation services that reduce carbon emissions and minimize electricity usage for decades to come. allenergysolar.com.
Welcome to Your Classical Storytime. I'm Mindy. Today's story, The Lost Menorah, is about how Reb Nachman, a wise rabbi from the town of Bratslav in Ukraine, helps a man called Reb Nussen with a big problem. The story is read by my friend Theodore Bickel and features music played by the Eakin Piano Trio, composed especially for Hanukkah, the Jewish festival of lights.
The Lost Menorah by Howard Schwartz. Reb Nachman of Bratslav in Eastern Europe was a great Hasidic teacher of the 19th century. A man of deep spiritual gifts, he wrote a number of beautiful stories. And here Howard Schwartz retells one in his book. This is an original story about Reb Nachman. The silver menorah had been in Reb Nussen's family for 400 years, and family tradition held that it was even older than that. Needless to say, this menorah was precious in the eyes of Reb Nussen, and so he was clutched with fear when he discovered on the morning of Erev Hanukkah that it was missing. How could such a thing happen? Reb Nussen and his wife looked everywhere. But it was not to be found. Then Reb Nussen's wife recalled that a man who had been collecting trash to leave at the dump had come to the house a few days before with a covered wagon. Reb Nussen's wife had filled several sacks with things for him to take away, sacks of the same kind in which the menorah had been stored. Somehow he must have taken the sack with the menorah as well and carried it off to the dump. When Reb Nussen realized that this was the only explanation, he was devastated. For the menorah must now lie at the bottom of the deep valley that served Bratslav as the town dump. There he was certain it would never be found. And when this likely truth sank in, Reb Nussen became dejected. He left the house and sat under a bare tree, sinking into gloom and melancholy. When Reb Nussen's wife saw how this loss had harmed him, she could not bear it. She blamed herself. So she went to Reb Nachman in tears and told him all that had taken place. When Reb Nachman heard what she had to say, he left his home at once and came to Reb Nussen, who sat blankly at the foot of the tree. So lost was he in his grief that he did not even notice Reb Nachman standing above him. And he was greatly startled when the Rebbe spoke and said, "Why are you sitting here, Nussen, when it is almost Hanukkah, and you do not even have a menorah with which to light the candles?" When Reb Nussen heard these words, he was startled. He leaped to his feet in anger, and then he realized that it was Reb Nachman who had spoken. But he could not understand why the Rebbe would rub salt in his wounds, and said, "Why? Why must you remind me of this, Rebbe, at such a moment, when I have sustained such a great loss?" And Reb Nachman said, "Because, Nussen, the menorah cannot be considered lost until someone has searched for it." What "What do you mean, Rebbe?" said Nussen. "Surely you do not think it possible that it is to be found?" "Why not, Nussen?" said Reb Nachman. "If it is possible for the coffin of Joseph to be recovered, even though it had sunk to the bottom of the Nile, surely it is possible for this precious menorah to be found. Waste no time brooding, Nussen, for if you do not find it by Hanukkah, then it will surely be lost for good." Now, Hanukkah would begin that very day at sunset. And in that valley was piled 50 years of trash. Still, Reb Nussen was suddenly filled with hope and determination, and he took leave of Reb Nachman and hurried off to borrow a horse so that he could complete the task in time. He made the old horse trot as swiftly as it could, but it was noon by the time he reached the valley where the trash was dumped. He tied the horse to a tree and slowly climbed down the sides of the valley until he reached the bottom. There, he was overwhelmed by the vast piles of trash which were spread out as far as the eye could see. Still, Reb Nussen refused to be discouraged, and he waded into the trash, digging with his bare hands. Before long, his hands were raw and sore, and he wished he had remembered a shovel, for in his haste he had not brought one. All of a sudden, Reb Nussen saw a shovel sticking up from the trash. He rushed to it and pulled it out, and was completely astonished to discover that it was not only a shovel, but his own shovel as well, a rusty one that he had once thrown away. Then he knew that the shovel was a sign from heaven that there was still hope, and he continued to dig with confidence and determination. For 3 hours he dug and dug, till suddenly he came upon a sack which resembled one of his own. And when he tore it open, he was blinded for an instant by the reflection of silver in the sun, for he had found the lost menorah at last. Then, with tears rolling down his face and his clothes filthy from the trash, he held the menorah and raised his voice in prayer. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one.
Thanks for listening to Your Classical Storytime from American Public Media. Find out more about the music you heard in this story and explore the rest of our library at yourclassical.org/storytime.